Have you ever heard of a dog that could change a person's fate? On a freezing snowy night in the midst of a raging storm, a mysterious German shepherd appeared at the doorstep of a lonely man. It didn't bark, didn't growl, just stood there, eyes full of silent pleading. But no one could have guessed that the moment Victor opened the door for it, his life would change forever. What led Rex, this extraordinary dog, to be abandoned in the snow? Who is searching for him? And did Victor truly choose to take him in, or had fate already decided for him? Before we dive into this remarkable story, we'd love for you to take a few seconds to hit the subscribe button on Dog Stories to support us. We truly appreciate it. Now let's uncover the mystery behind this special dog. The night was pitch black outside. Thick snow fell relentlessly, covering everything in a cold, white shroud. Bare tree branches trembled in the biting wind, creaking and groaning as if winter itself was growling a warning to all who dared to endure. Inside a small wooden cabin nestled in the remote mountains, Victor sat silently by the fireplace, his gaze lost in the flickering flames. The warmth of the fire was the only thing that reminded him he still existed in this cold, desolate world. He hadn't always been a man of solitude, but fate had pushed him into this way of life. Ever since his wife passed away, Victor had left the crowded city behind, seeking refuge in this isolated place. He no longer wished to engage with the outside world, nor did he want anyone to disturb him. His life had been reduced to a quiet routine, hunting, living off the land, and spending his nights by the fire, listening to the wind howl beyond the window. Tonight was just like any other night. Victor poured himself a cup of hot tea, the herbal aroma mixing with the crisp chill of winter air. He leaned back in his chair, slowly sipping the warm liquid while listening to the wind howl outside. But, amidst the howling blizzard, another sound emerged, a soft, almost hesitant knock. Victor frowned. Who could possibly be out here in the middle of nowhere at this hour? He set his cup down and stood up, making his way toward the wooden door. His heart pounded as the sound came again, weaker this time. When he pulled the door open, an icy gust of wind hit his face, forcing him to squint. In the dim glow of the cabin's light, a trembling figure stood on the doorstep. A German shepherd, its thick coat blanketed in snow, eyes gleaming amber under the light, pleading silently. It didn't bark, didn't whimper, just stood there, its legs shaking from the cold, staring up at him with desperate eyes. Victor froze, his mind racing with questions. How had this dog ended up here, alone in a snowstorm? Was it a stray? Or someone's pet? Where was its owner? Was there someone out there in trouble? He glanced around, searching the snowy landscape. But there was nothing. Just an endless expanse of white. No footprints, no signs of another soul. The dog was completely alone. He turned back to it, torn between shutting the door and letting it inside. He didn't like company, human or animal, but something about the pitiful creature before him made him hesitate. With a heavy sigh, Victor stepped aside. "Come in," he said, his voice rough. The dog hesitated for a moment, as if unable to believe its luck. But after a few seconds it stepped inside, its body shivering, carrying specks of snow into the warm cabin. Victor shut the door, instantly sealing out the bitter cold, leaving only silence and the crackling fire behind. He studied the snow-covered dog before grabbing a towel from a nearby hook. "Stay still," he instructed, and to his surprise the dog obeyed, sitting quietly as he brushed off the clumps of snow. Its thick fur was still damp beneath the icy layer, but at least it no longer looked frozen solid. After finishing, Victor stepped back, crossing his arms as he studied the dog. It lifted its gaze to him, as if sizing up the man who had just let it in. He did the same, observing every detail. This wasn't a wild animal. Its fur was well-groomed, free of dirt or signs of long-term neglect. Yet there was no collar, nothing to indicate it belonged to someone. "Who the hell are you?" Victor muttered. The dog didn't look away, its steady gaze almost as if it understood the question. With a sigh, Victor turned and walked toward the fireplace. then gestured toward a rug near the warmth. "Lie down there, and don't cause any trouble." The dog obediently stepped forward, curling up on the soft rug. A quiet sigh escaped it, as if finally finding a safe place in the middle of the brutal winter night. Victor watched it for a moment, longer, then settled back into his chair, taking a sip of his now cold tea. He had no idea what kind of creature he had just let into his home. But one thing was certain. Tonight, he was no longer alone. The next morning, Victor woke up with an unfamiliar feeling. For years, he had grown used to the silence that greeted him whenever he opened his eyes. But today, something was different. A steady, rhythmic breathing filled the small room. Looking down at the foot of his bed, he saw Rex curled up on the thick rug. For the first time in years, Victor didn't feel alone in the morning. Having another living being in the house disrupted the usual rhythm of his life. He had always been entirely self-sufficient, preparing his own meals, keeping the cabin clean, handling heavy tasks like chopping firewood and hunting. But now, wherever he went, Rex was right behind him. At first, Victor found it slightly irritating. He had grown accustomed to solitude, to quiet meals accompanied only by the crackling of the fire. But now, he wasn't just cooking for himself anymore. He had to think about Rex, set aside food for him, make sure he was warm enough. Rex, however, wasn't the kind of dog that caused trouble or demanded attention. He was disciplined, almost, as if he already understood the rules of the house. He didn't bark unnecessarily, didn't dig through things, didn't knock anything over. Yet, no matter where Victor went, those deep brown eyes followed him, waiting for something, some kind of signal from him. A week after bringing Rex into his home, Victor realized his routine had changed. Instead of sleeping in and sipping tea by the window each morning, he now found himself heading outside earlier, taking Rex for walks through the forest near his cabin. The freezing winter mornings that once kept him indoors no longer felt so unbearable. Now, the sound of Rex's paws crunching in the snow, the warm puffs of his breath in the icy air, and the eager energy in his every movement gave Victor a sense of purpose, something to look forward to. Gradually, he no longer minded having a companion. There was something strange about Rex that Victor couldn't ignore. He wasn't like an ordinary dog. Despite being abandoned in the snow, he never showed signs of fear or weakness. On the contrary, Rex carried an air of quiet confidence, as if he was no stranger to handling difficult situations. Victor soon realized the dog understood commands without any training. When he absent-mindedly said, "Come here," Rex obeyed, instantly. When he gestured with his hand, the dog reacted as if he had already been taught what to do. Curious, Victor tested him repeatedly, and each time, Rex's intelligence left him astonished. One day, Victor decided to test something. He threw a stick far into the distance and waited to see what Rex would do. To his surprise, instead of immediately chasing after it like any ordinary dog, Rex remained still, his eyes alert. Then, with calculated precision, he moved toward the stick, not in a reckless sprint but in a methodical way, as if he was assessing the situation before taking action. "You're definitely not just an ordinary dog," Victor muttered, his mind turning over the thought. Rex's intelligence didn't stop there. One morning, as Victor was preparing to head into the forest for a hunt, he slung his rifle over his shoulder and stepped outside. But before he could take another step, Rex suddenly blocked his path. The dog stood firmly in front of the door, letting out a low, warning growl. Victor frowned. He had never seen Rex act this way before. "What's wrong?" he asked, kneeling down to place a hand on the dog's head. Rex didn't bark, but his ears stood rigid, his posture tense. He sniffed the air, then looked up at Victor with an unmistakable expression, one of warning. Victor glanced outside. Everything looked normal. The forest was quiet. The sky was overcast, but nothing seemed unusual. Still, something about Rex's behavior made him hesitate. After a moment of consideration, he decided to postpone his hunting trip. A few hours later, an unexpected blizzard struck with terrifying force. Had he gone into the woods as planned, He would have been trapped in the storm with little chance of making it back. Victor looked down at Rex, gratitude and astonishment welling up inside him. "Did you really know this was coming?" Rex simply wagged his tail as if it was nothing at all. The days spent with Rex had changed Victor in ways he never expected. Before, life had felt empty, just a series of routines and obligations. But now, each morning when he woke up, there was something to look forward to. He began talking to Rex, not because he expected the dog to understand everything, but because Rex always listened. No judgment, no interruptions. Just those patient eyes watching him as he spoke about the past, about the losses he had never shared with anyone. One night, as Victor sat by the fireplace, holding an old photograph of his wife, he felt Rex lying beside him, resting his head gently against his leg. For the first time in years, the weight of grief didn't feel so crushing. Maybe, just maybe, Rex had taught him how to keep going. Over time, Victor no longer saw Rex as an unexpected guest. He had become something more, a part of his life, a true companion. Every time Victor stepped outside, he found himself checking to see if Rex wanted to come along. Every time he returned home, a sense of relief washed over him when he saw the dog waiting at the door. He couldn't remember exactly when it happened, but somewhere along the way, having Rex by his side had become something he couldn't imagine living without. There was no doubt about it. Rex's arrival had changed Victor's life forever. Victor had never been the type to question things that didn't concern him. He preferred a quiet life, free from unnecessary complications. But ever since Rex showed up, something had been nagging at him. This dog wasn't ordinary. It wasn't just his intelligence or his sharp instincts. It was the feeling that Rex hadn't come here by chance. One morning, as Victor was brushing Rex's thick coat, his fingers brushed over a small scar behind the dog's right ear. The dense fur had almost completely concealed it, but beneath his touch the skin felt uneven. A strange unease crept over him. He gently parted the fur and caught the glint of something metallic reflecting the light. His heartbeat quickened. He had heard of microchips being implanted in pets for identification, but this didn't look like a normal tracking chip. It was too small, too well hidden, and more than anything, why would a dog abandoned in the snow have something like this? Victor sat down on the floor, staring at Rex, who watched him in silence. "Who are you, buddy?" he muttered, a growing sense of unease settling in his chest. Victor had never felt the need for modern technology, but now he needed answers. He decided to drive to the nearest town, where there was a small veterinary clinic. When he stepped inside, he met Dr. Emma, a middle-aged veterinarian he had heard of but never spoken to before. As Victor explained his request to scan Rex's microchip, Emma gave him a curious look. "You found this dog?" she asked, holding a handheld scanner close to Rex. "You could say that," Victor replied curtly. The scanner beeped, and a sequence of numbers appeared on the screen. Emma frowned, typing the code into the system. But instead of displaying standard pet identification details, an error message popped up. She narrowed her eyes. "That's strange. This chip isn't registered in any regular pet database." Victor felt his throat go dry. "Then what is it?" Emma was silent for a few moments before shaking her head. "I'm not sure, but it looks like a military or government-issued microchip. I've seen police and military dogs with similar implants before, but their records are usually classified." Her words hit Victor like a thunderbolt. Rex wasn't just any dog. He had belonged to something, somewhere. After leaving the clinic, Victor couldn't shake the uneasy feeling gnawing at him. On one hand, he felt relieved to know that Rex hadn't just been abandoned by chance. But on the other, that also meant someone was looking for him. Determined to dig deeper, Victor decided to search for information using the microchip's serial number. Hours of scouring the internet led him to a hidden website, one not meant for ordinary users. When he entered the number into the search bar, an encrypted file appeared on the screen, with a single title flashing at the top: Project Blackhound. Codename: Rex. Victor froze. He wasn't a tech expert, but he knew enough to realize he had stumbled onto something he wasn't meant to see. Most of the file was locked behind layers of encryption, But one small, chilling section remained. Readable. Objective. Ensure the safety of Blackhound. If lost, recover immediately. Top secret. Blackhound? What the hell was that? And how was Rex connected to it? Victor turned to look at Rex, who sat quietly beside him, his deep brown eyes steady and knowing, as if he understood exactly what was happening. The sense of unease grew stronger by the minute. If Rex truly was part of a classified project, then sooner or later, someone would come looking for him. And just as Victor had feared, they arrived sooner than he expected. That night, as he sat by the fireplace, still trying to process everything he had uncovered, a knock echoed through the cabin. But this time, it wasn't the hesitant, desperate knock of Rex on that snowy night. It was firm, decisive. Victor stood up, a cold shiver running down his spine. He moved to the window, carefully pulling back the curtain just enough to see outside. Two men in dark clothing stood at his doorstep. They weren't locals, they weren't tourists, and they sure as hell weren't just random passers-by. Victor held his breath, his instincts screaming at him. Beside him, Rex stood rigid, ears pricked forward, body tense. He knew what this meant too. "We've got trouble," Victor murmured, his fists clenching. There was no more running from it. The mystery of Rex had been exposed, and now, the people who wanted him had come knocking. The wind howled through the cracks in the door, carrying a biting chill, but Victor barely noticed. One of the men spoke, his voice deep and steady. "Mr. Victor, we know you're in there. We just want to talk." Victor's pulse pounded in his ears. They know my name? That could only mean one thing. They had done their research. They hadn't come here by accident. He glanced at Rex. The dog remained perfectly still, his eyes locked on the two men outside. Part of Victor wanted to open the door and end the tension, but every instinct screamed at him not to trust them. Slowly, he reached for the hunting rifle mounted on the wall. He wasn't a violent man, but if he was pushed into a corner, he would fight. The knock came again, louder this time. Victor took a steady breath, then spoke, his voice low and cold. "I don't know who you are. What do you want?" A brief silence. Then the voice responded. "We're looking for a dog, a very special dog, and we believe it's inside your house." Victor's heartbeat quickened. They know about Rex, and if they had come all this way to find him, they wouldn't leave without a fight. "Who are you?" he asked, forcing himself to stay calm. A pause. Then, "We work for the government, and your dog is our property." A cold wave of dread rushed through Victor. Government? If that were true, why weren't they here with the police? With an official warrant? None of this felt right. "Prove it," Victor said, tightening his grip on the gun. Another long silence. Then suddenly, "Take him down." The door burst open. The door exploded open with a violent kick, the lock shattering as two men stormed in like shadows, their eyes sharp with deadly intent. Victor raised his rifle in an instant, but before he could pull the trigger, Rex launched himself at one of the intruders, knocking him to the ground with surprising force. The second man swung at Victor, but he dodged the blow just in time and slammed the butt of his rifle into the attacker's shoulder. The man staggered back but didn't go down. There was no time to hesitate. Victor shoved open the back door and shouted, "Rex, run!" The dog understood immediately. He released the man he had pinned, sprinting out the door into the freezing night. Victor didn't hesitate either. He bolted right after him. Behind them, heavy footsteps pounded against the wooden floor. Victor and Rex dashed into the forest, weaving through the towering, snow-laden trees. The icy air burned his lungs, but there was no time to think about the cold. The shouts of their pursuers grew closer. "Don't let them escape," one of the men roared. Victor pushed himself harder, but he knew he couldn't outrun them forever. Rex was their only chance. "Find us a way out, Rex," he commanded between ragged breaths. The dog instantly understood. He veered sharply, leading Victor toward a narrow path that cut through the woods, guiding him over a frozen stream. Their pursuers weren't far behind. Then, crack! A gunshot ripped through the night, the bullet whizzing past Victor's ear and embedding itself into a nearby tree they were shooting to kill. Victor and Rex kept running until they reached a small cave, hidden behind massive boulders. Without hesitation, Victor ducked inside, pulling Rex with him. He crouched low, pressing himself against the cold rock, trying to steady his breath. Outside, their pursuers were still searching. "They went this way," a voice called out dangerously close. Victor and Rex stayed perfectly still. His palms were slick with sweat despite the freezing air. Seconds stretched into minutes, each one feeling like an eternity. Then, finally, the sound of footsteps faded. They weren't giving up, but for now at least Victor and Rex had a moment to breathe. Victor turned to Rex, placing a hand on the dog's head. "You just saved my ass, buddy." Rex met his gaze, his intelligent eyes glinting under the pale moonlight. He didn't bark, didn't make a sound, but Victor understood him all the same. This wasn't over, but right now, it didn't matter. Why Rex was special? The only thing that mattered, Victor wasn't going to let them take him. Victor sat silently by the fire inside a small tent, deep in the forest, where no one could find him and Rex. The flickering flames cast shadows on his face, revealing exhaustion, but not fear. They had been running all night, weaving through dense trees, staying one step ahead of their hunters. Only now, with the sounds of pursuit fading into the distance, could he allow himself a moment to rest. Beside him, Rex lay curled up, his eyes half open, ears twitching at the slightest noise. Always alert. Always ready. Victor looked down at him, a strange sense of gratitude washing over him. What had once been a stray dog lost in a snowstorm was now an unshakable part of his life. Rex wasn't just a companion. He was the tether keeping Victor connected to this world. But Victor knew they couldn't keep running forever. Their pursuers might have lost their trail for now, but they would come back, and he couldn't let them take Rex. He needed help. After a long moment of contemplation, Victor thought of Emma, the veterinarian who had helped him before. She hadn't asked too many questions, but she seemed to understand that Rex wasn't just an ordinary dog. If anyone could help them find a way out of this mess, it was her. With his decision made, Victor patted Rex lightly on the head. "We're heading to town. Stay calm, buddy." Rex looked up at him, then silently stood, as if he, too, understood the gravity of the situation. As dawn broke, Victor and Rex navigated through back roads, avoiding crowded areas. He pulled his hat low over his face and wore an old coat to blend in. When they reached the veterinary clinic, Victor knocked 3 times, a signal he hoped Emma would recognize. The door opened, and Emma's eyes flickered with caution. But the moment she saw Rex by his side, she stepped aside. "Get in." As soon as they entered, she shut the door behind them. "I'm guessing you're in trouble." Victor nodded. "They're hunting Rex. I need to make sure they can't find him." Emma sighed and walked over to a filing cabinet, rummaging through the drawers. A moment later, she pulled out a small device, something that looked like a scanner. "The chip inside him might be trackable," she said. "I can remove it, but if I do this, there's no going back." Victor didn't hesitate. "Do it." Emma worked quickly, preparing her tools with practiced efficiency. Rex lay still, obedient, as if he understood this was necessary. Within minutes, Emma extracted a small microchip from beneath his skin and sealed it inside a metal container. "No one can track him now," she said, meeting Victor's gaze. "But that also means they won't stop until they're sure Rex no longer exists." Victor clenched his fists. He knew that. But at least now, Rex was finally free from their control. Without wasting time, Victor left town, driving toward a place far beyond the reach of those hunting them. He knew they could never return to his old cabin. It was too dangerous now. But that didn't matter. Beside him, Rex sat alert, his sharp eyes scanning the road ahead. They had lost everything. But in return, they had gained something far greater: freedom. Victor reached over, running a hand over Rex's head before offering a small smile. "We'll find a new place, buddy. Just you and me. And that's enough." Beneath the vast open sky, they drove forward, leaving the past behind, toward a new beginning. Victor and Rex's journey wasn't just a story of escape. It was a journey of rediscovery, friendship, and freedom. From a man burdened by loneliness and loss, Victor found an unwavering companion, a remarkable dog who not only saved his life, but also taught him that true connection could change a person in ways they never imagined. If you love heartwarming stories about dogs, the most loyal and mysterious companions of humankind, then Dog Stories is the place for you. Hit the subscribe button now so you never miss our latest stories of loyalty, bravery, and the incredible bonds between humans and dogs. And don't forget to turn on notifications because who knows? The next chapter of Rex and Victor's story could drop at any moment. If you were Victor, what would you do in this situation? Do you think Rex has truly escaped those who were after him? What do you want to see next in their adventure? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one and might even use your ideas for the next chapter. Dog Stories, where dog stories aren't just tales but emotional journeys that stay with you forever.